The day the resort's ribbon was cut, champagne was popping and camera crews were capturing every moment. I stood there grinning like an idiot, not because I was proud of what the HOA had built on my lake, but because in exactly 7 months I was going to sell the entire place right from beneath them for hundreds of millions. When I first saw Maplewood Lake, it felt like a scene from a painting you might find hanging in a dentist's office. All soft pastel colors, perfect gentle ripples, and a kind of peaceful quiet you could almost inhale. The water stretched out in lazy curves, surrounded by dense woods and a few worn-out docks, half submerged in the mud like sleeping dogs. The entire place smelled of wet earth, pine needles, and something ancient, something slower than the rest of the world. I knew right then that if I could, I would spend the rest of my life there. It had taken me 30 years of careful saving, with brown bag lunches, skipped vacations, and working weekends that no one else wanted. But finally, at last, I was ready. The property was small by most measures, barely an acre with a slim strip of waterfront, an old fishing shack leaning against the trees as if it might collapse if you breathed too hard near it, and a shaky dock that tipped sideways whenever the wind blew. But it belonged to me. No mortgage, no landlords, no angry neighbors stomping upstairs at 2 in the morning. Just me, my land, and the lake. The man who sold it to me was named Edward. Whitaker was a sun-weathered veteran who had called this place home for 70 years, fishing these waters alongside his father before him. Edward shook my hand on the day I closed the deal, told me to be careful of the snapping turtles near South Cove, and advised me that the lake had only one rule: respect it, and it would do the same for you. No one ever mentioned anything about a homeowners association. Not a single word, not a clause. It was simply land, pure and unspoiled. Or so I believed. The first several months were everything I had hoped for. Mornings began in a worn aluminum canoe with mist rising from the surface like ghostly fingers. Afternoons were spent clearing trails and chopping firewood. Nights were filled with stargazing under skies so thick with stars it felt like you could fall upward if you looked too long. The only neighbors were a handful of scattered families, mostly older people like Edward, who waved from their porches but generally kept to themselves. It was perfect, absolutely perfect. That was until the newcomers came. It began subtly. Shiny SUVs started kicking up dust on the gravel road. Contractors hammered and sawed around the clock. Where trees once stood, enormous houses with wide decks and stone chimneys sprang up, packed as close to the water's edge as possible without tipping over. The new residents wore pressed polos and yoga pants, spoke loudly on their phones about stocks and property values, and acted as if they had just discovered the lake themselves. It did not take long before rumors began to spread about a revitalization effort led by one of the wealthiest recent arrivals, a man named Brian Keene, who earned his wealth through commercial real estate ventures and had such a permanent tan it appeared almost artificial. Documents started circulating, polished with corporate branding and filled with warm, inviting language about safeguarding our shared gem and maintaining the charm of sunny shores for years to come. I examined the details carefully, reading the fine print twice, then 3 times. What they were suggesting was establishing a homeowners association called the Sunny Shores HOA, complete with all the usual features: required fees, voting power based on property size, strict rules on everything from fence heights to mailbox, colors, and most strikingly a clause stating the lake itself would be collective property managed by the HOA. At first, I found it laughable. The idea seemed ridiculous. My deed, along with those of the longtime families, contained no mention of any homeowners association, much less granting control of the lake to any group. The notion that a natural lake could be declared common property with just a few signatures felt like something out of a poorly written television drama. I refused to sign. Others from the old families who still cared did the same. But it did not make a difference. Edward and his team had been working quietly behind the scenes, securing signatures from the newcomers who now outnumbered us. Due to a questionable provision deeply hidden within the old township charter, if a supermajority of lakefront property owners agreed to form an association, its rules could be enforced retroactively on the entire lakeside community. They had the numbers, the legal experts, and the audacity. I received my initial welcome packet for Sunny Shores 2 weeks later. Inside, there was a glossy folder filled with bylaws, fee schedules, and a cheerful note stating that my yearly dues would amount to $3,200, and that my involvement was both expected and valued. I immediately tossed it into the wood stove. 2 days later, a crew of workers showed up at my shoreline unannounced. They brought lumber, power tools, and concrete mix. I rushed outside, demanding to know what they were doing. One young man, barely out of high school, shrugged and explained they were building a community fishing pier and a public picnic area to improve the lake experience for residents. All on my property. Without my consent, I called the township, but they redirected me to the county. The county claimed it was a civil dispute and advised me to resolve it with my homeowners association. The following week, a garish wooden sign appeared next to my old dock. Sunny Shores Lakefront Park, residents and guests only. It felt like a nightmare unfolding slowly. Soon after, the first fine arrived, taped to my front door with blue painter's tape, as if it were a passive-aggressive present, $5,004 for failure to comply. I was told to maintain the shoreline vegetation according to the HOA standards. It did not matter that I had been living there peacefully for several months without any trouble. Nor did it matter that what they called vegetation was actually a patch of native wildflowers that had been growing since Edward's grandfather's time. When I contacted the HOA office, a cheerful young woman informed me that all lakefront properties were now subject to new aesthetic rules meant to create a uniform waterfront appearance. I asked who authorized them to enter my property for inspection in the first place. She put me on hold. When she returned, her tone was brief and professional. She said, "You will need to direct any legal disputes to our compliance department," before abruptly ending the call. I attempted to talk to my new neighbors. I tried to explain that the lake did not belong to them to chop up and cover with concrete like a shopping center. Some listened politely. Most nodded and immediately went back to organizing lakeside yoga sessions and starlit cocktail parties. For them, this was not about the land. It was about status, personal branding, and making their vacation homes perfect for Instagram, no matter the cost. I tried to ignore it, focusing on my own peaceful retreat. But the situation worsened. Every week brought a new violation, a new fine, another smug email warning that my continued non-compliance could lead to tougher enforcement measures, including liens and legal actions. Then, at the quarterly town hall meeting, Edward made his major announcement. "Sunny Shores is not just constructing a community center," he declared, wearing the proud smile of a man unveiling the last piece of his ultimate plan. "They are creating a small community lodge right on the east bank, a charming venue for weddings, retreats, and lakeside gatherings, an asset to property values, a legacy for future residents." There was, however, one small detail. The lodge's location was immediately adjacent to my property, right beside my weathered dock, my dilapidated fishing shack, and myself, unwelcome as ever. I sat quietly, hands folded, saying nothing. The audience erupted in applause. They marveled and asked questions as architectural designs were displayed on a massive screen showcasing rustic wooden beams, stone fireplaces, and a vast lawn that, judging by its size, would consume most of the East Bank shoreline. No one questioned the impact on the lake. No one wondered who would cover the costs for new roads, sewer improvements, or the constant flow of wedding guests navigating our narrow gravel roads. And no one asked how the HOA managed to claim ownership of the shoreline in the first place. Sitting there beneath the flickering fluorescent lights, I understood that I would not win this fight with protests or angry emails. Not through appeals to justice or logic. No. If I wanted to endure what was ahead, I had to approach this challenge in a completely different way. So I returned home, dusted off I dug out an old filing cabinet and began recording every notice, every photo of unauthorized building, every penalty, every email, and every piece of litter dropped on my property. I took detailed notes, made duplicates, and immersed myself in learning all I could about property law, easements, covenants, and the distinctions between public and private waterways. I stood firm, rooted in the mud, and waited. Because one lesson I had grasped over time was that when those in power become greedy, they almost always push too far. And when that happens, all you need is to be ready with the correct document at the right moment to witness the entire operation collapse. Initially, I wondered if I had misunderstood. Maybe when Brian Keene announced the community lodge, my skepticism had clouded my judgment. Perhaps it truly was just a simple meeting place for Sunday potlucks and charity bake sales, as they had promised. I genuinely wanted to believe that. But that illusion was shattered about 3 weeks after the town hall meeting, when the first heavy machinery arrived and began slicing deep, fresh wounds into the eastern bank. It started with a low, rolling noise at dawn, the kind that shook windows and stirred you awake from the inside. I shuffled onto my porch in boots and a bathrobe, watching in disbelief as enormous orange machines tore through the trees as if they were made of paper. Pines, oaks, maples, all uprooted and tossed into towering piles ready to be burned. The smoke lingered for several days. The old paths disappeared within the first 7 days, replaced by churned-up mud and marked stakes that lined up right at the boundary of my property. I attempted to reach the HOA office by phone, but every call went straight to voicemail. I sent emails and even visited the brand-new welcome center they had established by the main road. There, a cheerful receptionist smiled with 2 bright white teeth and told me to channel all concerns to the Development Liaison Committee through written messages. It felt like speaking to a brick wall wearing lipstick. By the second week, the drilling began. They had brought in pile drivers as large as small apartment buildings, hammering steel supports deep into the earth to secure what I then discovered was not merely a lodge, but a 3-story event venue. It would feature a wraparound deck with seating for 500 guests. Every blow vibrated through my frame, shaking dishes in my cupboards and sending flocks of startled geese screaming over the lake. Debris started spilling onto my land, broken wood, fast food wrappers, empty beer cans, and even the occasional hard hat. Workers stomped across my lawn without sparing me a glance. More than once I found strangers parking on my driveway to unload tools. When I confronted them, they vaguely pointed to the muddy wasteland where the trees had once stood and said they had permission to be there. But permission from whom? Certainly not from me. Every single day brought a fresh insult. Bulldozers carved deep furrows dangerously near my dock, causing muddy water to splash across the foundation. Chainsaws roared from morning until night, tearing through anything that still dared to stand. One afternoon, I returned home to discover a porta-potty placed dead center in my backyard, its bright blue color stark against the uprooted soil, as if it were some cruel monument. I moved it myself, hauling it to the edge of the construction area with a rope and shouting a few choice words into the wind. Within an hour, a glaring orange violation notice was slapped onto my door. Unauthorized relocation of HOA property, $250 fine. I stared at the paper for a long moment, then balled it up and tossed it into the trash, so forcefully the lid flew off. The fines quickly grew worse after that. Failure to maintain construction debris to HOA aesthetic standards, $500. Non-compliance with noise abatement procedures, $300. Unauthorized obstruction of approved development activities, $750. It was absurd. It was Kafkaesque. The debris they cited me for originated from their own construction site, scattered across my land by the relentless wind now sweeping through the barren wasteland they had created. I documented it all. Dozens, then hundreds of photos. Heaps of discarded concrete bags collapsing into gray puddles along my shoreline. Torn plastic fencing fluttering like injured birds, tangled in the branches of the few remaining trees. The remaining trees stood amid deep ruts in the mud where backhoes had swung wide, crushing across my property as if it were no more than a minor annoyance. I sent photos to the HOA, the county officials, even the local news station. No one responded. No one seemed to care. I tried speaking to Brian once. It was a warm afternoon, the lake's surface calm, mirroring the stark steel framework of the new event center. I found him supervising a team of contractors near what had once been a tranquil glen, now turned into a devastated scene of exposed rebar and churned earth. Brian wore designer sunglasses and a polo shirt so bright it was almost painful to look at. I called out, trying to keep my voice calm, asking if we could talk. He turned, flashing that familiar politician's grin, and slapped me on the shoulder like we were old pals. "Hey, buddy," he said, "you should be thankful. This place is going to be the crown jewel of the county when we finish. Property values will soar. You'll be able to sell that little shack of yours for a fortune." I stared at him, mouth agape. "I don't want to sell," I finally said. His grin only grew wider. "Everyone has a price. You just haven't heard the right number yet." Then he turned away, barking orders at the workers like I was already forgotten. Around the same time, the propaganda campaigns began. Glossy flyers appeared in mailboxes all along the lake, filled with photoshopped pictures of happy families kayaking on crystal clear waters. Clear water and joyful couples, glasses of champagne clinking on well-kept lawns. Sunny Shores Resort, creating a brighter tomorrow hand in hand. These words shone brightly in cheerful fonts. The local paper published a glowing article about the project, interviewing Brian and a few of his close associates about the financial advantages the resort would bring. New employment opportunities, increased tourist income, higher property prices. Not a single mention of the harm caused to the environment, the loss of the forest, the destruction of the peacefulness that had made the lake special from the beginning. When they needed a scapegoat for their narrative, they did not look far. An unnamed source leaked a statement portraying me as a roadblock and a selfish resistor, someone unwilling to accept progress for the benefit of the community. They did not say my name, but the message was obvious enough. Neighbors who once greeted me now cross the street to avoid me. Mothers pull their kids closer as I pass by. Even the long-standing families, the ones I hoped might understand, stayed quiet, intimidated by the overwhelming wave of money and influence Brian and his homeowners association had created. I spent several nights seriously thinking about giving up, packing my things, selling the land for whatever meager offer they would give, and moving somewhere no one would ever find me again. Yet each time I considered this, I remembered Edward Whittaker standing in the dust outside the old cabin, trembling. I held my hand up as a reminder to respect the lake. I recalled the peaceful mornings spent in my canoe, watching the sun rise in shades of pink and gold over the mist, while loons called out across the water. I also remembered that this place had endured wars, droughts, fires, and fools far worse than Brian Keene. It would outlast him as well. I just had to find a way to protect it. So I contacted a lawyer, a true fighter, the type who wore suits far too large and spoke as if every chat was a court trial. His name was James Hawthorne. After I dumped a pile of fines, photos, and papers on his desk, he leaned back with fingers steepled and grinned like a man who just stumbled upon a fresh trap. "You might be sitting on something," he said. "Perhaps more than you think." He began researching, pulling up property records, old survey maps, and faded deeds yellowed by time. One rainy afternoon, as the storm pounded the windows of his cramped office, he slid a cracked leather folder toward me. "Found something fascinating," he said. It was an 1897 land covenant connected to Maplewood Lake, hidden deep in the original township documents, never properly revoked. My heart raced as I opened it. Inside, penned in the tight, delicate handwriting of a century ago, was a legal contract signed by the descendants of the first settlers. It clearly stated that anyone owning an adjoining piece of the eastern lakeshore, specifically the strip stretching from Whitaker's Bend to Cedar Hollow, carried exclusive rights to the water, as well as to the minerals beneath it and the access points. These rights automatically transferred to any future deed owner unless explicitly revoked. I followed the description with a trembling finger. Whitaker's Bend, that was Edward's old fishing spot. My land, my deed. James tapped the document with a large finger. "If this agreement is still valid," he said, "then technically you do not merely own your narrow shoreline, you also possess the lake access itself, and control over any commercial activities there without your consent." He paused, letting the weight of his words settle. I looked past the worn parking lot at Wadey and pictured it vividly, as if it were already reality. Brian Keene's polished resort standing boldly on a lake they no longer had legal rights to use. A fragile structure built on stolen ground, and me holding the one piece of paper that could tear it all apart. When I first discovered that covenant, I thought it might be too perfect to be true. A century can change much, and I assumed there was some legal loophole or forgotten court ruling that had weakened its power. But James Hawthorne was meticulous. Over the following weeks, he examined every record, legal action, amendment, and filing he could uncover. Every day I received an email or a phone call from his office. A trail of confirmations led inevitably to a shocking conclusion. The 1897 covenant had never been canceled or even properly challenged. It still carried full legal authority. According to the law, my small, worn piece of lakeshore controlled the mineral rights, access rights, and commercial usage rights for the entire lake. Every dock, every kayak rental, every luxury pontoon cruise planned by the HOA was technically reliant on my approval, and they did not have it. Edward leaned back in his chair one rainy afternoon, steepling his fingers as if enjoying the slow unveiling of a flawless trap. He explained that their entire project was built on land they did not own, like constructing a castle on a neighbor's sandpit and hoping no one would notice. I looked at the blueprints spread across his desk, overlays of the current resort development against the historic property boundaries. Their main event center, their prime attraction, stood on what was essentially stolen land. I could have gone straight to court, issued a cease and desist, and stopped the whole operation instantly. Part of me longed to do it, to see the arrogant smiles wiped away. But Edward raised a hand to stop me before I could speak. "Wait," he said. "Wait and let them finish." At first it seemed a bit mad. Why allow them to invest millions more into a project we could stop right now? But Edward explained with the calm of a man outlining a chess plan to a slightly intoxicated relative at a family gathering. At this moment they had already invested significant money. Large amounts, certainly, but still manageable. There were construction loans, development fees, and marketing costs. If we acted immediately, they might change course. negotiate, or find a way around us. However, if we waited, if we let them complete the project, hold the grand opening, celebrate with champagne, and host their first 100 weddings, then they would possess something genuinely valuable, something they could never risk losing. And that, Edward said with a spark in his eyes, was the moment we would act. Not just to collect a few fines or reach a settlement, but to gain ownership, control, and real profit. So I waited. I watched as the resort expanded like a malignant growth along the lakeshore. A vast, grotesque structure of fake rustic beams, imported stone facades, and perfectly maintained green lawns stretching like carpets. I waited while the Homeowners Association sent smug newsletters bragging about the upcoming grand opening of Sunny Shores Resort and Event Center, featuring ticketed wine tastings, private boat trips, and corporate retreat experiences. I waited as gas lamps were installed along the shore, the old dock transformed into a sparkling marina, and the western bay dredged to create a luxury swimming beach with cabanas available for rent. Every nail driven, every tree cut down, and every glossy flyer. What they released became another thread in the tightening web surrounding them. They believed victory was theirs. Brian Keene walked around the lake with the confidence of a ruler inspecting his realm, leading hard hat tours for investors and county officials. He grinned for the cameras, holding a cocktail in one hand and a dream in the other. Meanwhile, the other board members boasted and gossiped at every community event, dropping hints about the impending rise in property values and suggesting that perhaps the long-time residents who had resisted might want to sell while prices were still increasing. I played my role perfectly. I stayed silent, nodded, smiled, and showed up at the occasional Homeowners Association meeting, sitting quietly in the back while they congratulated themselves and celebrated their supposed genius. When the grand opening day eventually arrived, it was a grand affair. The entire lakeshore was decorated with white and gold banners declaring, "Welcome to Sunny Shores Resort." A brass band played loudly from a temporary stage. Food trucks lined the entrance road, offering expensive tacos and artisanal lemonade. News reporters positioned their cameras on the hill overlooking the marina, competing for the ideal spot to film the ribbon cutting. The board members wore matching embroidered polo shirts, each holding a set of oversized novelty scissors like commanders ready to divide the world. Edward took the microphone and began a speech loaded with self-praise. It was surprising that Edward did not hurt his shoulder while giving himself a hearty pat on the back. With a sweeping gesture of his arm, he announced, "This is the future, a shining symbol of community, success, and everything we can achieve by joining forces." The audience burst into cheers. I joined in the applause. I clapped until my hands ached. Because what no one realized, what no one cared to inquire about, was that beneath their feet, below the glossy boards of the marina and the imported stones of the plaza, under the sparkling water where the new jet skis floated restlessly, lay a century-old document covered in my name. That paper was about to become the most precious record in the entire county. Within 1 week, the legal paperwork was prepared. Brian collaborated with a group of real estate experts, contract lawyers, and litigation professionals to assemble a case so flawless you could have sunk it deep into the lake, and it would stay intact and dry for a full year. We filed a quiet title action to confirm the full authority of the 1897 agreement. We sought injunctions against commercial use without permission from landowners. We challenged every right-of-way, every dock authorization, and every event permit that relied on shared water access. They were all submitted simultaneously, creating a coordinated legal onslaught that overwhelmed the county clerk's office like a sudden flood. Soon after, news began to circulate. The local newspaper cautiously published an article titled, "Legal Battle Threatens Sunny." the development at Shores, cited by unnamed sources and concerned residents. Then the larger media outlets caught wind of it, and suddenly every real estate investor in the area was fixated on Maplewood Lake. That was when the offers began pouring in. Initially, it was just murmurs, secret inquiries from law offices and shell companies trying to gauge if I was open to selling my stake. Then the serious contenders arrived. Private equity firms focused on troubled assets, regional hotel chains aiming to grow, and even a few national resort brands who sensed opportunity. They were clear on what the HOA still refused to acknowledge: that I held control over the lake. Without my approval, their shining new resort was nothing more than a doomed project, a deserted place before opening day. I remained composed. I instructed James to delay responding to anyone immediately. Let the whispers spread. Let the suspense rise. Let the price escalate. Behind closed doors, a bidding battle unfolded, silent yet fierce, like predators circling injured prey. Each week brought a fresh letter of intent, a new set of increasingly attractive terms. 7 figures climbed to 8. 8 threatened to turn into 9. It was overwhelming, intoxicating, and frightening all at once. Meanwhile, the HOA blindly pushed forward, completely oblivious. They hosted their inaugural lakeside wedding, ending with fireworks that sent flocks of geese flying halfway to the next county. They organized the Taste of the Lake Food Festival, left my land littered with plastic cups and crushed paper plates. They introduced boat rentals, yoga retreats, wine cruises, and a summer concert series featuring aging rock bands that rattled the windows of my cabin well into the night. Throughout it all, every dollar they earned, every photo they shared, every review they encouraged online was a nail in their own coffin. It was clear evidence they were running a large-scale commercial operation on a lake they did not legally own. I kept a low profile. I stayed silent. I kept my camera ready, capturing every event, every unauthorized build, every act of trespassing and environmental harm. Then, when the time was right, when the offers reached a number so outrageous I had to check twice just to believe it, I looked at James across his messy desk and spoke the words I had waited months to say. Sell it. Because sometimes the greatest revenge is not a dramatic courtroom battle or a passionate speech. Sometimes the greatest revenge is cashing a check so huge it makes your hands tremble and walking away while the empire built on your stolen land crumbles to dust behind you. The offer I finally agreed to came from a national resort conglomerate, the type whose properties feature branded restrooms and valet-only parking lots. They wanted Maplewood Lake bad, not just the resort the HOA had pieced together, but the lake itself. They perceived something that Brian and his lively group of HOA raiders could never grasp. The real worth was not found in a flashy event hall or overpriced boat rentals. It was the water itself. It was the power. It was the rights that I carefully held under a signature written in the year 1897. When I completed the final paperwork, seated in James Hawthorne's cramped office, surrounded by witnesses, notaries, and enough legal papers to fill a fireproof vault, it still did not seem real. Even when the wire transfer arrived in my bank account, a sum so enormous it made me lean back in my chair and laugh like a madman, it still felt like a dream. Hundreds of millions of dollars, enough wealth to purchase my very own private island, enough to never work a single day again in my existence, enough to at last, finally, stop worrying. Yet the true reward was not the deposit itself. It was what followed afterward. The new owners wasted no time. Within 24 hours of the deal closing, teams of corporate lawyers descended on Maplewood Lake like hawks swarming a defenseless rabbit. Cease and desist notices were delivered by certified couriers to every location connected with the Sunny Shores HOA. The wording was sharp, unforgiving, and definitive. Effective immediately, All commercial ventures making use of Maplewood Lake and its surrounding lands were declared unauthorized trespassers on private estate. All access to the lake was revoked pending new negotiations. Every event, rental, retreat, and related activity was halted without delay. All commercial operations were ordered to stop immediately or face legal consequences. The resort's elaborate schedule, meticulously organized a year ahead, disintegrated overnight. Weddings were called off, prompting a surge of enraged brides-to-be, flooding the HOA's voicemail. Corporate retreats vanished, leaving irate executives demanding reimbursement. The summer concert series, celebrated as the highlight of Sunny Shore's cultural revival, was suddenly halted. The marina, boat rentals, and wine cruises were all closed by court order, their equipment secured behind hastily locked gates. Edward Keene lost control. He convened emergency board meetings, sent frantic appeals to county officials, and exhausted every option except standing on a street corner with a loudspeaker to stop the downfall. But it was too late. He had invested millions building a luxurious resort on a swamp without verifying ownership. Now the swamp had a new owner, with deeper resources, more skilled lawyers, and no emotional ties to the original community vision. Desperation leads to poor decisions, and the HOA reacted exactly as James anticipated. They initiated a lawsuit, or at least tried to. The Sunny Shores HOA claimed that the covenant was invalid, the sale was fraudulent, and that my ownership was illegal. They loudly accused me of malicious interference and wrongful gain. It would have been comical if it had not been so miserable, because by opening that door, they unlocked every other door they had desperately tried to keep sealed. James responded with a counter-lawsuit on behalf of the resort company, pulling into court every dubious land deal, every secretive vote behind closed doors, every questionable permit Brian and his associates had pushed through during the early stages of development. Depositions revealed emails where board members laughed about forcing through amendments without notifying the entire membership. Financial statements exposed HOA funds being diverted into personal projects and favoritism contracts awarded to friends and family. Witness accounts showed that signatures on important documents were either forged or obtained through deception. The local press, who had once idolized the daring visionaries of Sunny Shores, turned viciously like a pack of wolves sensing a feast. Headlines blasted accusations of fraud, corruption, and homeowners betrayed by those elected to protect their interests. It became a feeding frenzy. County investigators opened investigations. Civil lawsuits arose from enraged residents who had purchased homes at inflated prices based on promises of a shimmering lakeside utopia. Real estate agents began refusing to list properties in the community, citing concerns about their reputation. Banks started denying mortgage financing within Sunny Shores, fearing the complicated web of title disputes and ongoing lawsuits. Home values that had once soared suddenly plummeted. A clear justification shone for every tree that was felled, and every bird's nest that was destroyed fell like stones thrown into the now silent lake. Regarding the resort itself, the new corporate owners acted quickly and without mercy. They secured the parts they wanted most, the prime plots, and the infrastructure they believed worth saving, then demolished everything else. The extravagant event hall was stripped back to its bare concrete structure and abandoned to decay. The marina was taken apart, its gleaming pontoon sold for scrap metal. The artificial beach lost its plastic cabanas and fake palm trees, revealing only damaged land and stillness. The fireworks stands, the yacht club flags, the costly imported grass, everything disappeared like a fading fever dream at sunrise. I observed all this from my porch, holding a cup of coffee in my hands, a quiet smile on my face. The turmoil, the lawsuits, the frantic clearance sales no longer mattered to me. I was done with it. I was free. I had my money, my property, and my tranquility once more. Nothing they could do would ever take that away from me again. Brian Keene eventually sold his mansion at a huge loss, escaping the county under a cloud of shame. The last I heard, he was attempting to rebuild his career 3 states away, pitching some new visionary project to anyone naive enough to listen. Most of the other board members also disappeared, either ruined by legal costs or shunned by the very neighbors they once dominated like petty despots in their luxury SUVs. Vanished from the streets, the wine tastings and yoga retreats slipped away into the past. The bright future they guaranteed slowly transformed into a relentless, grueling decline back into nothingness. Meanwhile, the lake, my lake, mended gradually and stubbornly like an ancient wound, sealing itself shut. The geese were the first to come back, honking and bickering along the rocky edges. Soon after, the otter appeared, playful and inquisitive, weaving through the reeds. The fish returned as well, shimmering beneath the surface, undisturbed by roaring jet skis or booming music. The marks left by construction faded beneath the steady touch of rain and time. Trees sprouted anew where bulldozers once thundered. Wildflowers blossomed along the shores. The water, once clouded with mud and oil, cleared until it reflected like a perfect mirror. Early in the morning, when the mist hung low over the water and the only noise was the splash of my paddle, I would push my old canoe into the middle of the lake and simply drift. I watched the abandoned ruins of a once majestic resort fall apart and decay on the distant shore. Cracked pavement and rusting beams were slowly consumed by the eager forest. I listened to the quiet around me, thick with life and full of mysteries, and I smiled because in the end I did not just survive, I outlasted them. I buried them under the burden of their own greed. I transformed their arrogance into my triumph and reclaimed my home, older, wiser, quieter, just as it was always meant to be. With a fishing rod in one hand and a cup of coffee in the other, I watched the sun rise above the mist-covered horizon, turning the lake into a sea of gold. My thoughts drifted to Edward Whittaker, reflecting on respect, patience, and the wisdom of knowing when to fight and when to wait. The water gently kissed the side of the canoe, while the breeze carried the fresh scents of pine, earth, and pure air. In the distance, the remnants of sunlit shores crumbled quietly, as if a soft warning echoed on the wind. Some battles are won through strength, others through passion, but the most rewarding victories come from staying still and letting the world shift around you. And I had all the time in the world.